On May 5th, 2018, Italy came together for the funeral of Pamela Mastropietro. Her death had already started national outrage, and the grisly circumstances surrounding it only deepened the shock and fear rippling through the country. Authorities discovered her dismembered remains packed away in 2 suitcases. It is one of the most horrific deaths I have heard. An arrest followed swiftly, yet the investigation was anything but straightforward, and the truth behind these horrific events would take months to come to light. This is truly one of the most horrific murders I have come across. There are rumours that it was part of a voodoo ritual, but it also could have just been cold-blooded. But either way, the final moments that Pamela suffered were absolutely brutal. It's a complex case that had a big impact on Italy at the time. But before we dive in, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you are new here, then please consider subscribing and following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. This is what happened to Pamela in the end. She was dismembered and tossed on the side of the road inside 2 suitcases. The stench was horrendous, and she was treated like no one would miss her. It's quite telling that there had been little attempts to even hide the remains, a sign of how little the killer thought of Pamela. But she was loved, she was cared for, and it's this love that would ultimately help solve one of the most harrowing cases I have come across. Pamela Mastropietro was born on August 23rd, 1999, in Rome, Italy, into a prosperous family. Her parents were Alessandra Verni and Stefano Mastropietro. Their successful business afforded her every advantage: prestigious schools, a comfortable home, and a promising future. Yet beneath this privilege, Pamela struggled to make friends. Her quiet nature was seen as shyness, but as she neared her teenage years, deeper troubles began to surface. By the time she was 14, Pamela had fallen in with the wrong crowd. She began to drink alcohol and use substances. She was striking in appearance, and she got lots of attention from boys her own age. But her timid nature made her eager to please. She wanted to be accepted, leaving her vulnerable to manipulative friendships and abusive relationships. Substances became her escape. When she was on them, her inhibitions were dulled. She felt confident, and this worked for a short time, until her addiction set in and her life spiraled out of control. Her schoolwork suffered, and she started running away from home. Her parents grew increasingly concerned. When Pamela was 15, her family intervened and sent her into a rehab clinic in Rome. For a time, it seemed to work. She completed the program and returned to school, and life appeared to be back on track. But at 17, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a condition that can heighten feelings of isolation and drive a desperate need for affection, no matter the cost. Inevitably, she fell into another damaging relationship, this time with a 20-year-old Romanian substance dealer called Claudio Noto. His influence pushed her once again towards a life of substance abuse and even more. This was the point of no return for Pamela. Under Claudio's influence, she fell back into substance abuse, particularly the brown, and abandoned her education once again. This time, things sank to even darker depths. Claudio manipulated her into selling herself, and she began selling her body to support her growing addiction. This would be a form of currency that would lead to catastrophic events in the near future. When her family discovered the horror of what was happening to their daughter, they intervened once more, bringing her home and reporting Claudio to the authorities. He was given a sentence of 4 years in prison for essentially manipulating Pamela into selling herself and basically ruining her life. Determined to save their daughter, Pamela's parents sent her to another rehab centre in October 2017, this time in the peaceful hills of Macerata, far from Rome's temptations. Nestled by the sea, with a view of a vineyard, it offered a relaxing escape where she could focus on healing from addiction, and for several months it seemed to work. She stayed clean and hope began again. But what truly fueled her downward spiral? Was there a hidden trauma from her past? Or did her borderline personality disorder push her towards self-destructive choices? Something was driving her to make choices that would clearly ruin her life. On January 19th, the hope she once had to make a recovery seemed to be gone. Without warning, she packed her suitcase and left the clinic at roughly 9:30 p.m. Because it was a voluntary program, no one could stop her. She left behind her phone and her ID. The choice to leave these makes me question her state of mind at the time. Her plan was to return to Rome, but she did not tell her parents as she did not want to disappoint them. When she left the clinic, she wandered around until a taxi driver pulled over. Even though Pamela had no money, the man still took her to the station. Once at the station, Pamela realized that she had missed the last train. She was going to have to stay the night, but instead, the taxi driver from before offered for her to stay at his place, to which she agreed. That night, Pamela and the taxi driver had intimate relations. The taxi driver would later claim that it was consensual, but I doubt this. She clearly wasn't thinking straight. When Pamela woke up in the morning, she was feeling ill and asked the taxi driver to drop her off at Diaz Gardens. This was an area known for the dealing of substances and where many dealers would hang out. It was a notorious area of the town. Fact that she asked to go there means she must have known about the substance scene of the town already, and although I have no evidence, I believe she may have relapsed sometime prior to this, and she was now feeling unwell due to withdrawals. The taxi driver, although he said he did not think it was safe she went there, he decided to do as she asked and dropped her off, where she was now alone, with no phone or money or even identification, surrounded by dangerous people. She is a fresh-faced 18-year-old attractive young female, walking alone in this poor area where many illegal immigrants live, of which many are in gangs, dealing substances and trafficking, and a whole host of exploitation and crime. Soon, Pamela was approached by 2 Nigerian men, both undocumented, both rumoured to be dealing substances to survive. Their names were Desmond Lucky and Lucky Alwelma. She was desperate to score brown, but they claimed to only have green, but they knew where to find harder substances. The 2 men took Pamela to meet a man called Innocent Osagale. He had the substances Pamela was looking for. Desmond Lucky leaves once he has introduced Pamela to Osagale, leaving Lucky, Osagale and Pamela. Osagale suggests she takes the substance at his apartment, to which she agrees. On the way there, they stop off at a pharmacy where Pamela is last seen alive on CCTV, getting a syringe. Osagale is also seen behind her in the footage. They then make their way to his apartment, which was about a 20-minute walk away. Once there, the 3 began to smoke green together on the sofa in the living room, and then Pamela was given a large dose of brown. This was large enough to immobilize her, knocking her unconscious. Once she passes out, she is placed on Osagale's bed. At this point, Lucky leaves the apartment, leaving just Pamela and Osagali. Before continuing Pamela's story, it's crucial to understand the man she found herself with, innocent Osagali. 30 years old at the time, he arrived in Italy from Nigeria on August 26, 2014. Authorities suspected him of belonging to the Nigerian mafia, a syndicate infamous for crimes ranging from extortion and substance trafficking to murder. He was placed in a refugee camp and given an allowance to survive, but it didn't take long for him to slip into illegal activities, primarily substance dealing. Osagali was known to be a womanizer, and he also had 2 children. In 2017, he is convicted of dealing and sent to prison, and he was also due to be deported upon release. Somehow, that deportation never happened, and with his visa expired, he remained in Italy illegally. The local church, believing in the right of anyone to remain, paid his monthly rent of roughly €500. Exploiting their goodwill, Osagali sublet his tiny apartment, sometimes to as many as 10 undocumented immigrants, while pocketing the substantial profits. By the time the authorities examined his bank account, he had over €30,000 in there. Now, I want to be clear, this is not an attack on immigration. I am just saying that this was a bad man who should not have been in Italy in the first place. And now he was alone with Pamela, who was vulnerable and under the influence, and far from anyone who might have saved her. What happened next is almost beyond comprehension. While Pamela lay unconscious on Ogasali's bed, he began to force himself on her. At some point during the attack, she regained consciousness and fought back, clawing and hitting him. We can only imagine her desperation as she tried to escape. But Ogasali, already living in Italy illegally, couldn't risk her reporting him to the police, so he grabbed a knife and stabbed her in the stomach. Pamela collapsed to the floor, and Osagali believed she was dead. He knew he had to get rid of the evidence of his crime, so he began dismembering her body, starting with her foot. According to the coroner, his cuts were professional, as though done by someone with knowledge of such procedures. This could not have been his first time doing this. Now, if some of the reports are to be believed, then this is one of the most horrific things I have heard. She was dismembered alive. This was proven. But it's said that in the midst of this unimaginable violence, once Osagali had dismembered both her arms, Pamela regained consciousness, screaming in agony, most likely in absolute fear. Once she woke up, Osagali stabbed her again in the stomach and stomped on her head until she went silent. From there, the horror only deepened. Osagali drained her blood and bodily fluids, flushing them away down his toilet. He removed much of her skin in one piece, and he disemboweled her and placed her organs in paper bags and put them in the fridge. He intended to eat these later. Osagali decapitated Pamela and cut her into 20 different pieces. He then carefully washed each part with bleach in an effort to erase any DNA evidence. Finally, he folded her skin like a t-shirt and placed it along with her dismembered remains into 2 suitcases and called a taxi. Shockingly brazen, Osagali had the taxi take him to a remote location where he dumped the suitcases by the side of the road. He then got back into the same taxi and returned home. This act, carried out in plain sight, showed how confident and disturbingly experienced he was. You would think he would do his best not to be seen. But Ogasali literally just orders a taxi. During this time, the clinic where Pamela had been staying informed her parents that she had unexpectedly left the facility. Without any contact, her parents were worried and immediately filed a missing persons report, and the authorities circulated flyers and broadcasted pleas for help on the news. Everyone hoped she might simply be wandering somewhere, lost but alive. Early the next morning, a passerby strolling down a remote street noticed 2 abandoned suitcases emanating a foul odour. Intrigued yet unsettled, he walked closer, only to spot blood on them. Horrified, he contacted the local police. They arrived swiftly, accompanied by a bomb disposal unit just to be sure. Once they deemed the area safe, they unzipped the suitcases and made a discovery that rocked the entire country: the dismembered remains of Pamela Mastropietro. Immediately, the investigation escalated to a murder inquiry. Authorities traced her last known steps, reviewing CCTV footage that showed Pamela leaving the rehab centre and later entering the pharmacy to buy a syringe. A man accompanied her, but at that point, they had no idea who he was, or how he would soon become their prime suspect in an unfolding nightmare. When the taxi driver seen the missing persons posters of Pamela and realised the suitcases discovered by the roadside belonged to a murder victim, he came forward with vital information. He said that he had driven innocent Osagali to that very spot, leading authorities directly to Osagali's apartment. Inside, investigators found a scene of pure horror. They found Pamela's suitcase, blood-covered clothes, bloodstains on the floor of the apartment and the bathroom. And in this bathroom, they also found empty bottles of bleach. And most sickening of all, officers discovered Pamela's organs in the refrigerator. Though some were missing, likely consumed by Osagali. Convinced they had their killer, police arrested Osagali on January 31st, 2018. In a grim irony, the man called Innocent believed no one would come searching for what he thought was just another missing addict. Yet Pamela's family never stopped fighting for her, and their determination ultimately led authorities to uncover the truth. The chilling scene also raised another dreadful question. Was this the first time he had committed such a crime, or merely the first time he got caught? Once in custody, Osagali gave a very different account of events. He claimed that he returned to his apartment with both Desmond Lucky and Lucky Aluama, and that he fell asleep while Pamela consumed a large dose of brown. Sometime later, he said he woke up to find her dead from an overdose. Panicking, he allegedly dismembered her body to conceal what had happened, fearing he would be seen as a murderer, but denied any role in her actual death. Both Desmond and Lucky were then arrested as well, although they maintained that they had been out selling substances at the time of Pamela's murder. Their alibis checked out, yet all three remained behind bars on various substance-related charges, as authorities struggled to piece together what really happened. When the news broke of an undocumented immigrant brutally killing a young Italian woman, it sent the country into a panic. The case and Italy's immigration policies received huge media attention, and the public outrage grew. Tragically, some retaliated with violence. Luca Traiani, an Italian man armed with a handgun, opened fire on a bus carrying immigrants, injuring 6 people. Thankfully, no lives were lost that day, but it's shown how deeply the crime had inflamed tensions within the nation. With limited evidence to prosecute for murder, the investigation went cold for 6 months. Authorities shifted their strategy. They placed an undercover informant in Osagali's cell, hoping he might confide in a fellow inmate. This tactic proved effective. As the informant gained his trust, Osagali confessed that he'd met Pamela in the park, supplied her with substances, and then taken her home. When she passed out, he claimed he forced himself on her as payment, seeing as she had no money. Once she regained consciousness, she fought back, scratching him and threatening to contact the authorities. Driven by anger and a fear of being deported, Osagali stabbed her. Initially believing she was dead, he thought of stuffing her body into a suitcase, only he realized it would not fit. This led him to dismembering her. He said once he had cut off her limbs, she regained consciousness, and this is when he stabbed her again in the stomach. Police corroborated much of this through phone records and statements from Desmond and Lucky, who both remembered receiving a call from Osagali about an unconscious woman on his bed, which he then offered for them to sleep with her, but they both declined. The autopsy confirmed that the fatal injury was the second deep stab wound, which punctured Pamela's liver, and there was also Osagali's DNA under the fingernails on Pamela's hands, confirming that she did in fact fight back. With the informant's recorded confession, prosecutors finally had enough evidence to bring Osagali to trial in late 2019, with the informant as a key witness. Both Desmond Lucky and Lucky Alawama received 5 years for substance dealing, but I feel they have gotten off lightly, because when their phones were inspected, there were sickening images of torture to unknown victims and images of dismemberment, but it could not be proved that it was them that did this. Innocent Osagali, on the other hand, received life in prison with no possibility of parole, arguably the only fitting sentence for such a brutal crime. Even then, he filed appeals to challenge certain aspects of his conviction, hoping to reduce the severity of his whole life tariff. Each time he appeared in court, Pamela's mother, Alessandra Verni, sat in the gallery wearing a t-shirt with an image of her daughter's dismembered remains. Though the media were banned from publishing those photos, she was determined to remind Osagali and the world about the full weight of his crimes, and that no one should forget just how horrific his actions had been. All his appeals were denied, and he will die in prison. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.